What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Catholic who's going to talk to his subscribers about how to engage with atheists, or atheism in general. Let's see what he's got for us.
Many people who are given some degree of Christian upbringing, it must be said, are presented with a rather weak and incomplete version of the faith. So it's not surprising that many of these people subsequently embrace a slightly less tepid form of atheism once the lameness of their childhood faith is rightly called into question.
I mean, maybe that could be some of atheists out there that weren't fully taught their faith or something, or had a very loose faith. I myself was not all that really deeply into religion, so I guess I can kind of relate to it, but it's not that anybody proposed the lameness of my religion to me, and that's why I became an atheist. I don't know what statistics you're working with or who you've been talking to, but I would really need some citations on this particular matter. So I don't know. I doubt that you're going to provide any kind of citations as to why people leave the faith, or if you're just assuming this is why. But I know that I was in and out of deep religiosity. I fully believed in the faith. I understood the faith, or at least I thought that I understood the faith. At least I understood the faith as much as my preachers and my pastors and my priests all wanted me to understand it. So if that's the issue, then I guess it's your fault. Well, not yours specifically, but it's the priest, pastor, reverend, maybe. It's y'all's fault for not teaching people the faith correctly, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, we're going to get into what this Catholic guy has to say about atheism and atheists. So if you want to know what kind of shit talk he's laying down, then please stay tuned. Before we get into the video today, you should know that you can go to citationfuckingneeded.com and you can get your own Citation Fucking Needed shirt. This would make a great Christmas present for somebody in your life that regularly throws around the Citation Fucking Needed phrase. So definitely hit up the links in the description to get your own Citation Fucking Needed shirt.
And I would argue that much of the so-called debate between believers and atheists these days amounts to little more than these respective tepidnesses yelling past each other. I have no desire to add to that here. If we believers rightly complain that a number of present-day atheists critique a straw-man version of the faith, ignoring the comprehensive and nuanced intellectual life nourished within the Christian tradition, it behooves us not to make the same mistake in their direction. As such, in addition to the shallow and silly disparagement of religion so common these days, we must also acknowledge that there exist robust and thorough versions of atheism as well, which make serious critiques that serious believers need to reckon with.
I wholeheartedly agree there, Friar Mark. Atheism is definitely a reasonable position to have, and there are good, solid reasons to be an atheist. I'm not here to convince anybody to become an atheist or to leave their religion. All I ever want to do is get you to seriously consider what you believe and why you believe it. As long as you are the one that's coming to the decision yourself instead of letting somebody else tell you what to believe, I'm going to be happy. Atheism, being a lack of belief or a non-belief in a deity, doesn't make any positive claims or anything of that nature. So it's quite easy to defend atheism because we don't make any kind of claims. Now, there are some atheists out there that definitely make positive claims about the existence of God. The only claim that I would make is that I don't know whether or not a God exists, but I don't believe one to exist. And I feel like that is the most defensible atheist position you can have, the agnostic atheist position.
So, there's so much that could be said on this topic, but for the purposes of this video, I'd just like to briefly highlight a few themes that I tend to raise when I'm in conversation with a fair-minded atheist. And I should note that face-to-face encounters are generally much more conducive to fair-minded conversation than the cesspool of online comment sections.
Could not agree more there, Friar. Having a one-on-one conversation with somebody is going to be a lot more beneficial to both of you rather than interacting on Twitter or even on Facebook. People are emboldened to be dicks on the internet. So It's a lot harder to be a dick to your face. Although, it's not hard for me to be a dick to someone's face, as we all know.
First, let's dispense with some silliness. The whole notion that faith and science are incompatible.
How is that silly? Because as far as I know, every time science advances in our knowledge, it seems like the holes for God, it seems like the gaps for God to hide in get smaller and smaller. So I don't see how science is beneficial to faith. In fact, depending on what you mean by faith, faith could be just believing without any kind of evidence, or you could use faith in some other kind of way that includes evidence. Generally, when I think about faith, I'm taking things on faith because there's no evidence for me to feel secure in whatever thing I'm taking on faith. It seems like faith is what's there when evidence is not.
The vast scientific contributions by people of faith should be more than sufficient to debunk this idea.
No, I don't think that a person that has a religious faith discovering some kind of scientific principle means that there's no conflict between science and faith. You can easily see conflicts between science and faith all throughout history. Right off the top of my head, one of those would be like cloning or the use of condoms, which you being a friar, I'm sure that you would be against the use of condoms or contraceptives in general. Another thing is when Ben Franklin invented the lightning rod, he was hounded by religious people because apparently he was interfering with the will of God. Because every time somebody rung a bell on a church and they got struck by lightning, that was a choice directly made by God to kill that motherfucker with his lightning dick. Ooh, another one is with geocentrism. Because once Galileo pointed out how we don't live in a geocentric universe, there was a lot of pushback from the faithful. They wanted to believe in a geocentric universe because that's what they believe the Bible taught, which the Bible does teach. So you have countless examples all throughout history of people advancing our scientific knowledge and faith fighting against that advancement. Just because some of those people that were scientists and advanced our scientific knowledge were religious in some kind of way does not mean that there's no conflict.
I myself worked at a science discovery center for a number of years, even during my holidays from seminary, which led to a number of interesting conversations. And when my staff mates would quiz me on how I reconciled the two, I like to bring up the Big Bang Theory. The theory, not the TV show. After all, a lot of non-believers presume that all Christians read the Genesis creation account literally, and thus that the Big Bang Theory is some kind of slam dunk against us.
I actually don't subscribe to this. I don't think that the Big Bang Theory or the fact that the universe started is a knock against either a more scientific view of the universe, a more materialistic view of the universe, or a more religious view of how the universe began. So I don't think that it's evidence one way or another.
So when I would point out that the father of the Big Bang Theory was actually a Catholic priest, Monsignor George Lemaitre, it would often lead to some puzzled faces.
Well, not me, because I knew that he was a Catholic priest. So I already knew that, but also his discovery, just because he was a Catholic priest does not mean that there's no conflict between science and religion. That doesn't mean that there's no conflict between science and faith. Like the Big Bang Theory is not a religious theory. The religious hypothesis is that a big bearded wizard guy snapped his fingers and lit his farts on fire one day and created the entire universe. Okay, maybe not that vulgar, but you get what I'm saying. God snapped his fingers or spoke the universe into existence, therefore using a magical incantation to create everything. That's the religious and the faithful hypothesis, while the actual scientific theory behind this poses something more materialistic.
In fact, there are multiple scientific fields whose founding is attributed to Catholic priests, from genetics to acoustics to cell biology to accounting. At least 35 lunar craters and multiple asteroids are named after Jesuit priests because it was Jesuit priests who discovered them.
I don't really see how any of this matters. It doesn't matter who discovered genetics. The fact is that genetics is not based on faith, it's based on evidence. I would love to hear what you consider to be something that's based on faith and not on some kind of scientific knowledge. I don't think I'm going to get that in this video, but if you're watching this and you can tell me what you think about that, I would love to hear about it or read about it down in the comments.
Part of the problem in all this is that the term science is increasingly used as a political sledgehammer these days, as though it was some kind of all-seeing oracle whose objectivity is complete and unrivaled.
I mean, isn't that you guys? Nobody thinks that science knows everything or is some kind of oracle. I mean, last I checked, you religious guys think that exact same thing about your God. It's really weird when I hear somebody of religious faith shit talk science as this all-knowing thing when they literally believe in an all-knowing thing.
However, science is not a philosophical worldview, but a method of discovery, involving a lot of trial and error, with often inconclusive findings. It works best when detached from the political or ideological leanings of those engaged in it. But of course, it will always be fallible human beings setting the parameters and interpreting the findings.
How is this different from your religious faith? I mean, you've basically done the exact same thing, but with fucking idiots that wrote down in a book how a society should be ran. And I mean, you just accept that these are the words of God, even though human beings are coming to you and telling you that God spoke this shit to them. I don't see how the two are different in the way that you're talking about them.
As for faith, I would argue that we all take countless things on faith every day, even the most hardened atheist. I lived in Rome for 5 years, where simply crossing the street is an act of faith. Perhaps one of the biggest things we all take on faith, and upon which science depends, is the belief in an ordered universe. The scientific method requires the possibility that experiments can be repeated, so as to evaluate the merit of a given hypothesis.
Yes, but I mean, we don't take it on faith that uniformitarianism is true. I mean, we've proven through evidence that uniformitarianism gives us an accurate view of reality. So we don't have to take it on faith because we have evidence. Uniformitarianism works because of evidence, not faith. So if you have any other examples of like faith or any kind of faith proposition that is distinguished from science, I would love to hear it. Not sure if we're going to hear that in the video, but anyways.
And this in turn requires an ordered universe in which the laws of physics, for example, are consistent and reliable. Yet science has no reason to presume an ordered universe. It could just as likely be random chaos.
With the exception that all of our evidence points to an ordered universe or points to uniformitarianism being true. So if all of our evidence points in that direction, then we're not taking it on faith that it is ordered. That's what the evidence supports. And science wouldn't work if it was just random chaos throughout the universe. It also wouldn't work if God could just randomly intervene in our ordered universe. At any point in time, magical shit could happen. So how could we do science with that? Science wouldn't be able to work if God did that.
Furthermore, you can't use the scientific method to prove that there's an order in the universe, because this would be circular reasoning.
Until you can observe the universe not being ordered, there is no reason to presume otherwise. The fact that the universe is ordered and does conform to uniformitarianism, we can do science. And until you can prove that uniformitarianism is false or that the universe is not ordered, then science will continue to give us an accurate view of reality. But considering that science has been able to somewhat reliably indicate the truth of reality, I would say that you've got a really massive uphill battle to overcome the presumption of order.
So, while science can explain a lot of things, without recourse to metaphysics, it can't even begin to explain itself. And here's where some atheists, who pride themselves on their inquisitiveness, suddenly display a notable lack of curiosity. The intellectual foundations of science? Not important. All that matters is that it works.
Well, no, it is important. We acknowledge the presumptions that we make or the assumptions that we make, but considering the fact that we make these assumptions and the science seems to work out just fine, seems to indicate that our assumptions are correct. Until you can prove how our assumptions are wrong, science will continue to function as it has. So it's not that we don't want to know about these assumptions or anything like that. We make these assumptions about reality, like an ordered universe. We understand that these are assumptions, but we have no reason to doubt that these assumptions are true.
There's tremendous interest in questions of how, what, where, and when. But when it comes to the question we've all been asking since we were toddlers, why, many atheists lose all curiosity.
You see, I disagree. Just because we don't know why the universe is ordered does not mean that we have stopped wondering why the universe is ordered. We still wonder why, but we may not be able to answer it. But regardless of that point, the universe seems to be ordered. And from that foundation, we can build our scientific knowledge off of it using the scientific method. And until you can show us that that foundation is not supported by any kind of evidence, then the assumption seems to still hold true.
Why is there anything as opposed to nothing, for instance? Of course, for an atheist, why is the great unanswerable question, so it's often declared out of bounds.
Are you fucking kidding me right now? No, it's not. We ask why all the time. Just because we aren't actively investigating the why of one question doesn't mean that we're totally throwing out the why of any question at all. I would think that questions would be quite caustic to your religion. I mean, sure, you're an apologist, so you've got answers for every why, but I still think that it's very important for everybody to ask why about things, or how do you know things?
It's not a coincidence that modern science emerged from the monotheism of Christian Europe, with a few assists from the monotheism of the Muslim Middle East. Christianity believes that all of creation is infused with divine order, and this laid the philosophical foundations upon which the scientific method could flourish, as it did in the church-founded university system.
Regardless of why people originally thought the universe was ordered, the universe seems ordered, so we could go from that particular assumption and build off of it. It doesn't matter if people thought that Beetlejuice was the thing that gave the universe order. The important thing is that we took the assumption of order in the universe and we used that to build the scientific method. It doesn't matter who built it. The scientific method is meant to reveal the truth about reality. Sadly enough, every time we use the scientific method against religious claims, we see that the religious claims fall flat and this materialistic universe is all that remains.
Moreover, the prevailing monotheism meant that Christian Europe no longer worshipped nature, as their ancient ancestors had, which now freed them to analyze it with the necessary detachment.
Well, I mean, I don't think that the reduction of paganism is what allowed us to develop the scientific method or allowed us to ask questions of why. I don't understand how monotheism is the central point in creating the scientific method.
Building upon classical philosophy, Catholic scholars outlined three properties of being, known as the three transcendentals: truth, beauty, and goodness. These are objective properties of everything that exists.
You can be objective about things, but what you're talking about is absolute. You would say that these are absolute properties. A lot of apologists mix up objective and absolute. Now, I do believe that there is an absolute truth to this reality, but we are restricted by our own human experience, and so we may never know what that ultimate truth of reality is. I like how you say that beauty and goodness are objective or absolute in some kind of way. Those are literally subjective words.
And they are ultimately seen as flowing from the true, good, and beautiful God.
Because your holy book says so, or your religion says so. I don't think that any of those things flow from your fictitious version of God. And I mean that quite literally. It's fictitious. It was completely made up. Nothing in the Bible maps to reality. So I disagree with your whole idea that these things flow from a one true God. That's just some bullshit that was made up.
Well, the scientific method contributes to a certain kind of truth by showing that some hypotheses are more likely to be false and others are more likely to be true.
Well, I mean, that's just using the scientific method to sort through the different hypotheses. I don't see how that connects to your previous statement about God and how it flows from God and shit. This seems like a non sequitur.
But it provides no standard for determining what is good or beautiful. In other words, science offers no suggestion for what we should do with the information it provides.
No, but I mean, that's not the goal of science. The goal of science is just to reveal the truth of reality, or at least describe reality in the truest way possible. It's not going to tell us what we should and shouldn't do. That would be us. We are the ones that determine that. And it's definitely not God that determines it, because even then, it's still some asshole telling us that God wants that to happen,
seemingly leaving us in an ethical and aesthetic vacuum. But of course, that's not how we live. We all have our various codes of morals or ethics, whether acknowledged or not, by which we make value judgments on things big and small. And we all think that some things are more beautiful than others, whether we have a conceptual framework for these judgments or not. And here's where culture and history fill the void left by science and logic.
I feel like he just admitted that morality and everything that he just talked about is subjective, which is a little weird. Because I feel like he's going in the way of, well, God is our foundation for morality. But, I mean, right here, you just laid out how morality and all of this philosophy shit is very subjective.
Many folks in the West and beyond probably attribute much of their morality to self-evident truths and inherent human traits, which a quick study shows have been neither inherent nor self-evident for most of human history. On the contrary, I would argue that much of the self-evident morality that most of us take for granted is actually the fruit of centuries of Judeo-Christian influence upon our culture.
What's one of these self-evident values that directly maps to Judeo-Christian influence? Because if you take an honest look at the history of Christianity and Judaism, you will see a very bloody history that doesn't give a fuck about the lives of humans. It just cares about spreading its religion everywhere. I mean, true, it seems to care about the lives of the people that adhere to the religion, but fuck everybody else. They don't mean horse shit to the Christians. So no, I don't think that it's centuries of Judeo-Christian principles, because these principles that you're talking about, like let's take one from just about any society, that's don't kill your fellow man, or don't murder your fellow man, rather. Now, you can trace that back to Judaism, but even before that point, societies were mandating that you shouldn't kill your fellow countrymen, like in a murderous kind of way. But that mandate in the Ten Commandments to not murder is not the same as you shall not kill, because God definitely commands them to kill motherfuckers just a little bit after that. So I'd love to hear what you think, either Friar Mark or anybody watching this video, as to what exactly would be a Judeo-Christian principle that has had influence over centuries. And it has to be specific to the Judeo-Christian religion.
And the more that a consistently atheist worldview divorces itself from its Judeo-Christian heritage, the more it will find itself in a moral vacuum, as thinkers like Nietzsche discovered to their dismay.
What moral vacuum? Because, like the United States, our laws are pretty antithetical to anything that's in the Bible. I mean, the first 4 commandments in the Old Testament is about sucking God's dick. So I don't understand why you think that these are Judeo-Christian values that have had an influence on our society. Now, at one point, you could have said that, even though it wasn't enshrined in our laws, the society and culture of America was definitely all about Christianity. But then you had individual fights between Catholics and Protestants. And that is a very old fight that's been going on ever since the Reformation.
This is why thoughtful observers such as Pope Emeritus Benedict have suggested that amidst all the deconstruction of our time, simple beauty and goodness are far more likely to win people over than is dry argumentation.
Pope Benedict? You mean that guy that oversaw the Catholic Church's department for handling the claims of child abuse and sexual abuse? That guy who swept all those records sort of under the rug, or helped the church hide the sexual abuse that was happening? That guy? Okay.
Lastly, I think there's value in tackling head-on the problem of unjust suffering, given that it's a universal human experience. The atheist answer to this problem is simple and stark. Life is cruel and random and meaningless.
No, that's not what atheists would say at all. Life is cruel. You take a look at any kind of nature program, you will see how savage life can get. Random? Sure, it is quite random. Things happen just by happenstance all the time. While there is a set of events that would lead up to an event, it's still just a random event. But we would not say that it's meaningless. We would say that you give yourself meaning, or you give things meaning. This is painfully obvious as we look throughout the ages at society and culture. At one point in time, we didn't have any kind of meaning attributed to slaves. And then we woke the fuck up one day and was like, oh, they're human just like us. Maybe we shouldn't be enslaving people. We are the ones that give things meaning, including our own lives. We give our own lives meaning. So you're just completely wrong about your assumptions about atheists here.
Again, how such a worldview is reconciled with the order necessary for science to work is a relevant question, but I've already spoken to that. We believers are challenged in turn with what's often called the problem of evil. How could a God who was meant to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving allow the existence of evil?
That is a good fucking question there, Friar Mark. Last time I checked, I couldn't really call myself all that good of a person if I just sat there and watched some horrible shit happening. Seems to me like you wouldn't call that person good either. But yet you still continue to call God good, even though he sits back with his beer, most likely a Bud Light, watching the bad shit happen and letting it happen. And in some cases, making it happen as dictated by the Bible.
This is a real problem, which people far smarter and holier than I have wrestled with over the centuries. And we should admit that some Christians try offering some very saccharine cliches in response, which I would caution anyone against using with a grieving mother in a hospital emergency room.
Good on you. I really don't think that you should bring that up to a grieving mother. I always hate it when there's some kind of tragedy happen and a child dies and somebody's like, oh, heaven just needed another angel. Go fuck yourself.
I would argue that Christianity's best response to the problem of unjust suffering isn't an idea, but an event. Namely, the crucifixion.
What? How is that an answer for anything? Jesus got nailed up on the cross one time, even though he was an eternal being like God, and it was basically sacrificing a weekend. And that little bit of pain compared to everything that he had not felt pain about. Yeah, that's an explanation.
In the crucifixion, we see God himself personally entering into the mystery of human suffering and experiencing it from the inside.
Okay, but still, does it not fly a red flag for you that God, who created the universe, created all the rules that he governed us by, and he created very specific rules, especially like rules on how to bedazzle the temple in which he's to be praised in, or how you're supposed to gut the animals and burn their entrails into fucking ash. Like, even down to what kind of incense and what kind of fire to use to light the incense. He made all of these rules, but he couldn't overcome having to take human form and have himself nailed up on a cross. Let me ask you this, Friar. If I come up to you and I smack myself in the face with a shovel and I said, I did this for you, so you owe me one. Do you really think I owe you one? I could have totally circumvented the shovel to the face by just not doing it. The same way God could have just not gotten crucified. Kind of seems like he's trying to guilt trip you into sucking his dick. You get what I'm saying?
And as a priest, I've seen this image of Christ on the cross offer far more consolation to grieving parents, for instance, than any words of mine ever could.
I mean, can you imagine being a Catholic and you come up to a grieving mother, and I hate to laugh about this, but it's just so unbelievably dumb. You got a grieving mother there that's just lost her child, and you got a priest that walks up to her, and he's just like, he takes out a crucifix, and he's like, yeah, I know that's got to be hard that you lost your child, but you see, Jesus got pinned up on a cross, so it's okay. Don't do that. Like, look, Jesus suffered and then he resurrected and he continued living in heaven. But, it's really hard. Like, I don't understand how this is any kind of comfort other than, you're just telling the mother, like, look, Jesus died for our sins, so therefore your son's in heaven. How do you know that? I mean, no offense to any grieving mothers out there, but the son could have been a dick, and he could be burning in hell right now, but the Catholic priest is like, but, Jesus died, so feel better. I mean, is that not just a little ridiculous?
Yeah. It's horrible.
For it shows that we are not alone in our suffering, but that God in Christ is right there in the middle of it with us.
No, he's not. Honey, where's Jesus?
Oh, he went to go get Mexican.
He got Mexicans.
Food. He went to get Mexican food. He'll be back in a little bit.
Yeah, is he going to suffer with us, though, through whatever the Mexican food does to us? He's going to get volcano ass, too?
Yep.
Oh, is that what this friar means?
I don't know.
What the fuck do you mean that he's suffering right here with us? If Jesus ever existed, and if Jesus was crucified, that happened so long ago, he's not feeling pain anymore. That motherfucker resurrected. Okay? He doesn't feel pain. He's a god. Or he is God. I don't know how you guys do it. I mean, the point is that Jesus is not experiencing pain along with us. He felt pain for a minute part of his existence, if he even exists, let alone as a divine entity.
And then, when the time is right, if a person's faith allows, the sorrow of Good Friday gradually gives way to the dawn of Easter Sunday. And the reason why the Easter story truly is good news is that if God can take the brutal death of his only begotten Son, transform it into the salvation of the world, then none of our own sufferings are beyond his ability to touch.
Why couldn't God do that without the need of torturing and killing somebody, let alone his own son? I mean, you say that, atheists don't want to ask why. Well, I'm asking why right now. Why did God choose to do that BDSM shit instead of just giving us salvation? Like, why couldn't he just wiggle his nose or some shit and, did a little bewitched thing, like, and then, boom, it's all gone. Salvation's here. There we go. We didn't need to pin him up like a goddamn one of those donkeys, pin the tail on the donkey kind of thing. We didn't have to do that. Just God went, and then he's done. Why? If you're religious and you're watching this, please answer me. Why did God have to do that? Why was, you're telling me the most knowledgeable being in this universe didn't see a way around pinning up his only son and killing him?
None of our tragedies are beyond his ability to transform. None of our deaths are beyond his ability to raise new life.
Well, except there's nobody that's been raised from the dead, at all. At least in this particular fashion that you're talking about. So I don't even know what you're trying to reference here. Other than the whole idea that our, post-death bodies, our resurrection bodies are going to be raised up, maybe. That hasn't happened yet. And trust me, there have been skeletons that have been waiting for so long for Jesus to come back and our resurrection bodies to be here. But, fuck me for not believing that shit, I guess.
The good news of Easter is that suffering and death no longer have the final say. Our God has entered into the depths of human suffering and transformed it into new life.
There are 10 times worse things than crucifixion that happened, especially after Jesus was crucified, and those things were performed by Christians. I don't think that you really understand the depths of human suffering. I mean, it's quite ridiculous for you to think that him getting, executed on a cross, which was a common execution method at the time, is somehow the depths of human suffering. Something tells me that you need to get out from whatever fucking rock you're living under.
Therefore, suffering is not meaningless, and life is not meaningless.
Not even atheists don't even say that life is meaningless, but I mean, we've covered that.
And to be sure, this response is an act of faith, but it's a faith that's not contrary to reason, as anyone willing to engage with a thinker like Thomas Aquinas, for instance, will soon discover.
Thomas Aquinas and his 5 ways are shit. I've covered them all. They're not convincing whatsoever. So stop using them. But it's kind of hard because all of apologetics now is based on Aquinas' 5 ways in some fashion or another. So,
And it's a faith that I've seen bring countless people back from the pit of despair. Nothing but wishful thinking, some will say. Well, they're free to think that. But we humans cannot survive very long without meaning. And yet with genuine meaning, we can endure some remarkably difficult things. And this lived human evidence, if you want to call it that, is perhaps a more convincing response to the challenge of unjust suffering than any theoretical concept.
It's really not. Because, I mean, you still have yet to tell us why God chooses to sit by and watch people suffer. All you've said is, well, you know, God sent his son to be killed. So, I mean, I don't know what your problem is with human suffering. I mean, God takes part in it too. Well, took part in it just that one time. Just that one time. It's kind of like a cheat day for The Rock. You haven't answered anything about suffering as far as it pertains to your theology, other than to say, well, Jesus got nailed. That's not an answer.
Okay, I'll leave it there for now. I should emphasize that I don't consider any of these points I've made to be slam dunk rebuttals of atheism, but I do think they make a decent launching pad into a conversation with someone willing to have one.
I don't see how this is like a launch pad into discussing whether or not atheism is true, which atheism can't be true just because of the fact that it's just describing what somebody does or does not believe. Like, that's all that it does. So I don't see how any of these points that you brought up today really launch into a conversation about atheism. It just seems to bring up more questions about your faith and why you think some things in your faith. But in any case, I've taken up enough time today from everybody. He's done with his little monologue. I appreciate all of you guys coming out, watching today. If you will, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this guy's points. Do that down below in the comments section. Hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of video. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!